Hello and welcome to a new UiPath demo. In this video, we'll have a look at the new functions and the improvements of the debugging feature in UiPath Studio. They were designed to enhance the debugging experience and speed up the process of finding workflow malfunctions. Let's begin. In order to present the new features, we'll create a new project that sums up the elements of an array. Let's first add a sequence for our activities to the Designer panel. Next, we need two variables. We're using the first one to store the elements of the array, so we can set its type to array of integers. Let's also set a default value. The second variable will store the result, but we won't use the default value field this time. Instead, we'll drag an assign activity to the Designer panel and type 0 in the value field. To compute the sum, we'll use a for each activity. Now don't forget to set the argument type to integer. And we'll drag another assign activity in the body section for the sum. In the end, the result will be displayed in a message box. Now, let's see the first improvement of the debugging feature, the slow step option. Unlike before, slow step now has 4 different speeds. By default, slow step is disabled. To enable it, we simply have to click this button, and the execution will be performed at the slowest step possible. Every time we click slow step, even during the execution, the debugging process speeds up. Now, there are 4 paces at which we can debug our workflows. Every time we click the button, the execution speeds up until the normal pace is reached. Let's now run this workflow in debug mode. As you can see, the activities are performed at a speed that can be tracked by the human eye. Let's make this go faster. Okay, now the execution ended. You probably noticed that the layout changed in debug mode. The locals panel is on the left side, the output is on the right, so the center only contains the designer panel. This way, the visibility of the workflow during the debugging process is increased. The locals panel supports not only primitive data types, but also complex ones, such as arrays or data tables. Now let's move on to our next topic. In order to illustrate some more features, let's deliberately include an error in our process. We'll use the CLNT function, but instead of the digit 0, we'll type in the letter O, and this will ensure that an error will be thrown. We can create a new integer variable in this assign activity. Let's click the debug button again. When the error is encountered, we're presented with a message box that provides 4 options. Break pauses the execution and gives us the chance to inspect the activity that threw the error, as well as the current values of the variables. Retry reattempts the execution of the activity that failed. Ignore skips the execution of the faulty activity and jumps to the next one. The continue option throws the exception. We'll go with break for now. Now let's talk about a new feature, namely the global exception handler. Let's switch to the Design tab, click the New button, and select the Global Handler option. This workflow is the one to be executed every time an error is thrown in any one of our projects. Now, there are 2 predefined arguments, error info and result. The direction of error info is in, as it brings the details related to the encountered exception into this workflow. In our case, let's have the handler write the name of the activity that threw the error. Let's also add a log message activity to display the message of the error. The result argument has the out direction and is used to set the next action of the global handler. Now there are 4 different modes which can be set for this argument. Continue, ignore, retry, and abort. All of them run the handler at least once. Continue rethrows the error, ignore continues the execution, starting with the next activity after the faulted one, and abort stops the execution. Now, we want the execution of the activity that throws the error to be attempted 3 times. So, the next behavior that we're going to pick is retry. In order to configure the mechanism, we have to use the retry count property of the error info argument. After reaching the 3rd attempt, we'll choose the ignore option. And this way, the execution proceeds from the next activity in the workflow. Finally, let's add the write line activity to display the number of attempts, the error message, and the behavior in the output panel. Let's run the workflow to see what happens. Here is our sum, so the execution ended. When we take a look at the output panel, we can see that there were 4 execution attempts. In the first 3 cases, the behavior was retry, and in the 4th one, the activity was ignored. Both the activity and the error message are displayed, according to the way in which we configured the handler earlier. A project can be assigned a single error handler. Any workflow can be set as an error handler except the main one. All you have to do is right-click a workflow and select Set as Global Handler. The global handler can be disabled at any moment using the Remove Handler option. Another new feature is Focus, which provides the option to jump to the current execution step regardless of what is currently displayed on the screen. If we open the global handler and then click Focus, we can see that Studio switches back to the main workflow where the faulted activity is highlighted. Now this feature is extremely useful in complex projects that contain multiple nested workflows. We can stop the debugging process for now. Let's move on. As breakpoints play an important role in the debugging process, several improvements were brought to increase their effectiveness. Starting with this version, breakpoints can be disabled, which means that we don't have to delete a breakpoint and add it again if needed. Instead, we can temporarily cancel it. If we click the breakpoint button once, we set a breakpoint at the currently selected activity. When clicking it the second time, we disable the breakpoint temporarily. The 3rd click removes the breakpoint completely. Let's enable it for now. The behavior that we've just described can also be achieved by pressing F9 or by right-clicking an activity that might cause errors and selecting the Toggle Breakpoint option, which is a newly added one. As you can see, we can enable, disable, or remove the breakpoint as we did before. Moreover, we can manage all the breakpoints using this menu in the Execute tab. The actions that we can perform are removing, enabling, or disabling them globally. Starting with the 2018.3 version of Studio, the execution of the workflow is paused right before the activities marked with breakpoints, as opposed to the previous versions, in which the breakpoint activity was performed before the pause. Another improvement is that all our breakpoints are saved automatically when we close the workflow file. Let's open Studio again. And there they are. So, in this demo, we went over the slow step feature, which can now be used at 4 different speeds, the exception handler workflow type, the focus option, and the way of disabling breakpoints. And that was all for today. Thank you for watching.